Martha Ellery was 34 years old when the county council declared she was no longer needed, dismissed her from the tiny clerk's office where she had spent nearly half her life preserving the history of other people while quietly believing there would always be a place for her own. They claimed the bridge office would be modernized, that old papers were clutter, that fresh hands and louder voices belonged to the future, and so she stepped into the cool autumn air with only $7.43 wrapped inside a faded cloth purse. 3 days later, against every sensible warning whispered across the town of Black Ash Crossing, she spent $5 to purchase the abandoned toll bridge itself, a weather-beaten stone crossing over the Elkwater River that everyone insisted was nothing more than a crumbling burden waiting to collapse. It seemed like the last desperate choice of a forgotten woman, with nowhere left to stand, yet hidden inside the ancient stonework rested something no flood, no thief, and no passing generation had ever uncovered, something capable of restoring not only Martha's future, but the broken memory of an entire community. Settle in and let us tell you the story of Martha Ellery. If you're listening from a place that others have forgotten, tell us where you're from in the comments, because every overlooked place carries a story worth remembering. Long before disappointment found Martha, she belonged to a quieter rhythm that seemed woven into the river itself. Black Ash Crossing rested among broad hills where maple trees blazed scarlet each autumn, and where wagons slowed before crossing the old toll bridge, their iron wheels singing against weathered stone, polished smooth by generations of travelers. The bridge was older than nearly every building in town, built before the Civil War by patient stonemasons whose names had long faded from memory. It stood without complaint through floods, bitter winters, and scorching summers, becoming less a structure than a faithful neighbor everyone expected to remain forever. Martha's father, Edwin Ellery, served as assistant keeper of the bridge records. Every wagon, every livestock herd, every shipment of grain, timber, coal, and livestock passed through careful hands before continuing westward. His handwriting was admired throughout the county, not because it was decorative, but because it never lied. He believed ink possessed a conscience. A careless record, he often told his daughter while guiding her small fingers across yellowing pages, becomes tomorrow's injustice. Those words settled deeply inside her. When other children chased dragonflies beside the riverbank, Martha sat beside her father beneath the warm glow of oil lamps, learning to straighten curled parchment without tearing it, learning how different inks aged, learning why dates mattered more than opinions. She discovered that history was not only written by famous people, it lived inside receipts, signatures, toll ledgers, faded maps, marriage notices, weather observations, and letters folded between forgotten pages. Her mother, Clara, balanced the seriousness of Edwin with gentle laughter. She baked coarse rye bread that filled their modest cottage with comforting warmth and planted herbs beside every window, insisting beauty belonged wherever honest work was done. She never measured wealth by coins. Instead, she measured it by whether neighbors crossed one's doorstep willingly. During difficult winters, Clara quietly delivered soup to widows before feeding herself. During harvest seasons, Edwin stayed late helping farmers calculate fair weights after sunset, without charging another penny. Their kindness spread quietly. No speeches celebrated them. No statues honored them. Yet people trusted them. Trust, Martha learned, was the richest possession a person could own. As she entered adolescence, Edwin allowed her to copy official entries into practice books. At first, her letters leaned unevenly across the page, but within months, her careful script became nearly indistinguishable from his own. Visiting merchants occasionally complimented the bridge office, without realizing half the day's entries had been written by the quiet girl arranging fresh candles beside the desk. Edwin never boasted. He simply smiled. "Steady hands," he would whisper. "Steady hearts." The river taught patience, too. Spring floods sometimes swallowed the lower stone arches beneath roaring water. Summer evenings painted golden reflections beneath the bridge, while fishermen waited silently for trout. Autumn leaves drifted beneath its span, like little boats carrying forgotten wishes. Winter transformed every railing into crystal lace. Martha watched every season. She remembered everything. She could identify which wagon belonged to which family simply by listening to its wheels. She knew which horses grew nervous, crossing in heavy rain. She recognized widowers who paused halfway across the bridge because memories traveled beside them more faithfully than companions. By the time she reached 20, she understood something few others noticed. The bridge connected more than opposite riverbanks. It connected lives. Children became adults crossing it. Soldiers departed and returned. Merchants built fortunes. Families escaped hardship. Doctors hurried across during storms. Funeral processions moved slowly over the same stones that welcomed wedding carriages. The bridge witnessed every beginning and every ending, without asking for recognition. Perhaps that was why Martha loved it. Not because it was beautiful, though it certainly possessed quiet dignity. Not because it was old, though its age inspired respect. She loved it because it served. When Clara passed away after a sudden fever, the house felt painfully silent. Edwin folded grief into work because that was the only language he understood. Martha followed his example. Together they preserved records during the day and memories during the evening. Sometimes Edwin spoke aloud while dusting shelves. Your mother always believed forgotten things deserved another chance. Martha never forgot those words either. Years drifted onward. Railroads expanded. Telegraph wires stretched across counties. Automobiles remained rare curiosities, appearing only occasionally along distant roads. Yet people spoke endlessly about progress. Progress became a fashionable word. Old became another word for unnecessary. County officials visited less frequently. Young politicians preferred efficiency over preservation. Storage rooms filled with ledgers dating back nearly 70 years. Several commissioners questioned why anyone still kept such records. They're only old papers, one remarked dismissively. Edwin answered calmly. They are proof. The commissioner laughed. Proof of what? That promises were kept. Few appreciated the answer. When Edwin died peacefully, one winter evening, after returning from the bridge office, Martha inherited neither property nor savings beyond the modest cottage and his books. His greatest inheritance consisted of habits. Rise early. Work honestly. Leave every document more orderly than it arrived. Respect facts. Protect truth. She carried those lessons into her new position as official records clerk after the council recognized there was no one better prepared for the work. For years, she served faithfully. She repaired brittle ledgers, cataloged forgotten maps, copied fading entries before they disappeared forever. Whenever storms leaked through the bridge office roof, she personally moved boxes away from damp walls. When mice chewed bindings, she mended them. When visitors searched for ancestral property lines, she often found answers no one else believed still existed. Many thanked her warmly. Most forgot her name before reaching home. That suited Martha perfectly. Recognition had never motivated her. Purpose had. The bridge remained her quiet companion through every changing season. She often paused halfway across before sunrise, listening to water move beneath ancient arches, older than anyone still living. Sometimes mist curled upward from the river like breath rising from sleeping giants. Sometimes hawks circled overhead while dawn painted the eastern sky with pale amber light. Those peaceful mornings became her greatest luxury. She owned little, wanted less, believed enough. Then the county elections changed everything. A new commissioner named Roland Mercer arrived carrying polished boots, expensive coats, and ambitious speeches about modernization. He promised larger roads, faster commerce, newer offices, and fewer expenses. Crowds applauded every announcement because prosperity sounded convincing when spoken loudly. Mercer toured public buildings only once before declaring many records unnecessary. History slows progress, he announced during one council meeting. Martha quietly disagreed. History prevented mistakes, but quiet voices rarely defeated confident ones. Mercer ordered inventories. Boxes were counted without opening them. Shelves were measured without reading their contents. Costs were calculated. Values were not. Rumors spread through town that the bridge office would close before winter. Older residents frowned. Younger merchants welcomed change. Few imagined what would be lost. Martha continued organizing ledgers anyway. Every page deserved care whether tomorrow arrived or not. One rainy afternoon, she discovered an index referencing several toll books from the earliest years after the bridge was built. According to the catalog, the volumes should have occupied an entire lower shelf. The shelf stood empty. She searched nearby cabinets. Nothing. She checked attic storage. Nothing. She examined every inventory her father had ever written. The oldest toll records had vanished decades earlier. No explanation accompanied their disappearance. Only a single notation remained in Edwin's handwriting. Transferred for protection. Protection from what? Transferred where? No destination appeared. She searched every cupboard and trunk inside the office over the following weeks without success. When she finally mentioned the mystery to Commissioner Mercer, he barely looked up from signing paperwork. "If they're gone," he said with a shrug, "they couldn't have been very important." Those careless words lingered in her thoughts long after she left the office, because somewhere beneath the dust of forgotten years, Martha felt certain the truth had merely been hidden, not lost. The rain arrived before dawn on the morning Commissioner Roland Mercer announced the bridge office would close. It did not fall with the violence of a summer storm, nor with the icy cruelty of winter sleet. Instead, it drifted softly over Black Ash Crossing, settling upon rooftops and wagon tracks like a quiet farewell. Martha unlocked the office one last time before the council meeting, lighting the familiar oil lamps, although daylight had already begun filtering through the narrow windows. She could not bear the thought of the old room sitting in darkness during its final morning, as though it had already become a tomb. Dust floated gently through the amber light, while shelves of ledgers watched silently from every wall, each volume containing years of births, shipments, toll collections, livestock counts, bridge repairs, flood reports, and countless ordinary moments that together formed the true history of the valley. She ran her fingertips across the bindings one final time, whispering the dates beneath her breath, the way some people recited prayers. There was comfort in order, even when the world beyond the windows insisted on replacing it with haste. Before leaving, she carefully locked every cabinet exactly as her father had taught her decades before, straightened the ink bottle on her desk, and placed Edwin Ellery's worn pen inside its wooden case. Then she closed the office door behind her without looking back, because she feared she would never find the strength to walk away if she allowed herself one last glance. The council chamber was crowded by the time she arrived. Merchants filled the front benches, hopeful that Mercer's promises of wider roads and lower taxes would enrich their businesses. Younger farmers spoke excitedly about progress, while older residents sat quietly near the rear of the room wearing expressions that suggested they had watched enough generations mistake speed for wisdom. Mercer stood confidently beside a large map spread across a polished table. His smile possessed the smooth certainty of a man who had never doubted his own conclusions. "Friends," he announced, "our county has entered a new century. We cannot continue burdening ourselves with unnecessary expenses. The Bridge Records Office has become obsolete. We require roads, not paperwork." Several people applauded. Martha remained standing near the doorway, her hands folded calmly before her. Mercer continued explaining budgets, maintenance costs, and efficiency. Every number sounded reasonable, until one realized not a single figure measured memory, trust, or justice. When he finally invited questions, Martha rose quietly. "Commissioner," she said, her voice carrying farther than she expected, "may I ask what will become of the bridge records?" Mercer barely hesitated. "Whatever possesses legal value will be transferred to the county courthouse. The remainder will be discarded." The word discarded settled over the room with astonishing weight. Martha felt several older residents stiffen. "Discarded," she repeated. Many of those ledgers contain the earliest property agreements for families still living in this valley. Mercer smiled politely. the sort of smile offered to children asking inconvenient questions. "Miss Ellery, surely you understand we cannot preserve every scrap of paper forever." "No," she answered gently, "but we should preserve the truth." The room became strangely quiet. Mercer folded his hands behind his back. "Truth resides in people, not in moldy books." Martha looked around the chamber before replying. "People forget. Ink remembers." No applause followed. No cheers defended her. Yet several elderly faces nodded almost imperceptibly. Mercer ended the discussion by calling for a vote. The council approved the closure by 6 votes to 2. Just like that, nearly 70 years of careful record-keeping ceased to matter. Martha gathered the few belongings remaining inside her small office before sunset. There was little to carry. Edwin's pen, Clara's teacup, a blanket folded beneath the desk for long winter evenings, 2 books on county surveying, a pressed maple leaf her mother had tucked inside an old ledger years earlier. She placed everything into a wooden crate and carried it home herself. No one offered assistance. Most people assumed she would soon find another position somewhere else. Yet jobs suited to a woman whose greatest talent involved preserving forgotten histories were becoming increasingly rare. Weeks passed with unsettling speed. Martha visited every neighboring town seeking work. Some offices already employed clerks. Others had eliminated record keepers entirely. One merchant suggested she become a seamstress. Another recommended domestic service. A banker politely explained that bookkeeping required stronger business instincts than women usually possessed. Martha thanked each person regardless of their assumptions and walked home before dark. Her savings disappeared slowly at first, then all at once. She sold the brass clock that had belonged to her grandfather, then her mother's silver serving spoon, then the extra rocking chair beside the fireplace. She planted vegetables behind the cottage and mended neighbors' books for a few coins whenever possible. But winter approached faster than opportunity. The first frost whitened the grass one morning as she counted the money remaining inside her purse. $7.43. She turned the coins over in her palm one by one. Enough for several weeks of modest food if she spent carefully. Not enough to survive the entire winter. Certainly not enough to begin another life elsewhere. That afternoon, she wandered toward the river, almost without deciding to do so. The old toll bridge stood exactly as it always had, stretching confidently above the slow-moving elk water, while autumn leaves collected against its stone supports. The toll house windows were boarded. Grass had begun growing between the wagon ruts. The place felt abandoned despite remaining physically unchanged, as though neglect possessed its own invisible weather. Old Benjamin Harker sat fishing downstream beneath a cottonwood tree. He had crossed the bridge nearly every week for 50 years. Seeing Martha approach, he removed his hat respectfully. "Strange without hearing wagons stop for toll anymore," he said. "Feels quieter than it ought to." Martha nodded. "Quiet can be lonely." Benjamin glanced toward the bridge. "County says they're planning a new iron crossing downstream." "So I've heard." He sighed deeply. "Then this old bridge will likely be torn apart for stone." The words struck Martha harder than she expected. Torn apart, not repaired, not remembered, simply dismantled because something newer had arrived. She stood staring at the weathered arches while evening sunlight painted them gold. Suddenly, she realized she had spent more years of her life beside those stones than anywhere else in the world. The bridge had witnessed her childhood, her parents, her work, her grief, and every ordinary day between. She could no more imagine Black Ash Crossing without it than she could imagine the river flowing backward. Several days later, the county posted a public notice outside the courthouse. Surplus properties would be auctioned before winter. Few citizens paid much attention until the list circulated through town. There were abandoned storage sheds, neglected pasture lots, 2 collapsed barns, an empty warehouse near the railway, and near the bottom of the page, almost as an afterthought, former Elkwater toll bridge and adjacent toll house. People laughed openly when they reached that line. Who'd pay money for an old bridge? one merchant joked outside the general store. Unless they fancy collecting moss. Another replied, costs more to maintain than it's worth. Even the blacksmith shook his head. Wouldn't take it if they paid me. Martha folded the notice carefully and carried it home. That evening, she placed it beside Edwin's old surveying books and studied the wording repeatedly until midnight. The bridge possessed no commercial value. It generated no tolls. It required repairs. The council wished only to remove responsibility from its books. But what if ownership meant preservation? What if someone simply refused to let it disappear? She slept very little. By sunrise, an idea had settled inside her with uncomfortable certainty. It was not practical. It was not wise. Yet neither had her father been practical when preserving records everyone else ignored. The auction attracted surprisingly few bidders. Farmers came hoping to purchase pasture land. Builders examined the warehouse. No one even glanced toward the bridge listing until the auctioneer finally announced it. Former county toll bridge, he called. Opening bid, $5. Silence answered him. A few chuckles drifted through the crowd. Someone muttered that $5 was too much for a pile of aging stone. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Any bids? Martha stepped forward. $5. Heads turned immediately. Mercer himself raised an eyebrow. The auctioneer looked almost relieved. $5. Any advance? Nobody spoke. After several moments, he struck the gavel. Sold. An uneasy murmur rippled through the crowd. As Martha counted 5 worn dollar bills into the clerk's hand, several neighbors exchanged puzzled glances. One elderly woman touched Martha's arm gently. "Child," she whispered kindly, "what have you done?" Martha looked toward the bridge, standing quietly above the river beyond the courthouse windows. "I couldn't let it become forgotten." She walked away, carrying the deed folded inside her coat pocket. She now possessed $2.43 to her name, ownership of an abandoned bridge everyone considered worthless, and absolutely no idea how she would survive the coming winter. Yet as she crossed the familiar stone arches that evening, the fading sunlight caught something unusual deep within the western parapet. For only an instant, beneath a gap where ivy had loosened after years of growth, she noticed what appeared to be the sharp edge of carefully cut masonry hidden behind the vines, a shape too straight to belong to nature alone. She stopped walking, her heartbeat quickening as her father's final mysterious notation echoed through her memory. Transferred for protection. Martha stood motionless until twilight surrendered to darkness, her eyes fixed upon the narrow gap in the bridge's western parapet where the ivy had pulled away from the stone. The opening was hardly noticeable unless the evening sun struck it from exactly the right angle, and even then it appeared to be nothing more than an ordinary crack left by decades of weather. Yet the longer she studied it, the more certain she became that the edges were too straight, too deliberate, as though an experienced mason had once carved the opening only to disguise it beneath carefully fitted stones. She climbed onto the broad parapet as carefully as she could, brushing aside the damp vines with trembling fingers. Beneath them lay a single rectangular stone, unlike the others surrounding it. While the bridge itself had weathered into soft shades of gray, this one retained a faint trace of pale limestone beneath centuries of dust. Even more curious, someone had carved the tiniest mark into its lower corner, so small it disappeared beneath the moss unless viewed from inches away. It was not a decoration. It was a mason's symbol, one Edwin had once shown her inside an old book describing hidden maintenance compartments built into certain public structures during the 19th century. The memory arrived so vividly that she could almost hear his voice beside her. "Good builders leave ways to protect what matters most," he had said, while tracing similar symbols upon a faded drawing. "Sometimes the strongest vault isn't inside a bank. Sometimes it's inside the building everyone walks past every day." Martha climbed down and hurried home before darkness completely swallowed the valley. She spent nearly an hour searching through Edwin's books until she found the volume she remembered. Inside, between diagrams of arches and stone foundations, appeared a brief section describing concealed niches constructed within bridges to safeguard emergency documents, construction plans, or valuables during floods and civil unrest. Such compartments were intentionally hidden so that even many officials would never know they existed. She closed the book slowly. Her father's mysterious note echoed louder than ever. Transferred for protection. Protection from theft. Protection from fire. Protection from war. Protection from forgetfulness itself. Before dawn, she returned carrying only a lantern, a small pry bar borrowed years earlier from Edwin's tool chest, and a determination that outweighed her uncertainty. Mist drifted low across the Elkwater River, muffling every sound except the steady current below. Birds had not yet begun singing. The entire valley seemed to hold its breath as Martha carefully cleared away more ivy. The marked stone refused to move at first. She worked patiently rather than forcefully, remembering Edwin's warning that haste damaged old craftsmanship. Nearly an hour passed before she felt the slightest shift beneath the pry bar. Dust trickled downward. Then, with a deep grinding sound that seemed almost impossibly quiet after so many silent years, the stone slid inward by barely 2 inches. Cool air escaped from the darkness behind it. Martha's heartbeat quickened. She widened the opening just enough to slip her lantern inside. The flame revealed a cavity extending nearly 3 feet into the bridge wall. It had been lined with carefully fitted brick, astonishingly dry despite decades of storms. Inside rested a weathered oak chest, reinforced with black iron bands, its surface coated in fine gray dust, untouched by human hands for generations. She stared for several long moments without moving. The chest itself appeared almost ordinary, yet something about its presence filled the tiny chamber with profound significance. It was not hidden treasure waiting for fortune seekers. It had been placed there deliberately by someone expecting another honest person to eventually find it. She reached inside with both hands. The chest proved surprisingly heavy. Inch by inch, she eased it onto the bridge walkway until it rested before her in the growing light of dawn. The iron lock had long ago surrendered to rust. A gentle tap from the pry bar caused it to crumble apart. Martha lifted the lid slowly. The scent that escaped was neither decay nor mildew, but the dry fragrance of aged paper preserved beyond expectation. Layer upon layer of folded cloth covered the contents. Whoever packed the chest had wrapped everything carefully against moisture. Beneath the final cloth lay dozens of leather-bound ledgers arranged with remarkable precision. Martha opened the first volume. Her breath caught instantly. Across the title page, written in elegant 19th-century script, appeared the words, Elkwater Toll Register, April 1849. Her hands trembled. She opened another, then another. Every one belonged to the earliest years of the bridge's operation. The missing records, all of them, not destroyed, not stolen, protected. Tears gathered in her eyes before she realized she was crying. She gently turned another page. Every entry remained astonishingly clear. Names of wagon drivers, freight descriptions, toll payments, livestock counts, weather observations. Every ordinary detail faithfully preserved by clerks who believed someone in the future might someday need the truth. She spent hours examining volume after volume until another object hidden beneath the ledgers caught her attention. It was a sealed leather portfolio bearing the county's original wax crest. The seal remained intact. Martha hesitated only briefly before opening it. Inside rested several folded maps far older than anything she had ever handled, together with a thick bundle of correspondence tied by faded blue ribbon. The top letter was addressed simply, "To whoever bears responsibility for the bridge after me." Martha unfolded it carefully. The handwriting belonged to Josiah Fenwick, the bridge's first chief keeper, dated October 1864. He explained that Confederate raiders operating far south had caused widespread fears that important county records might be destroyed if unrest spread northward. Rather than risk losing proof of property ownership and toll revenues, the earliest bridge commissioners had secretly ordered duplicate ledgers and legal documents hidden inside the bridge itself. Only 4 trusted officials knew the location. Should peace continue, the records would eventually be returned. But 2 of those officials died during a cholera outbreak. Another relocated west. The 4th never documented the hiding place before passing away unexpectedly. Generation after generation forgot the chamber entirely. Yet Fenwick's letter contained something far more astonishing than an explanation. It referenced an attached ledger identified as the founder's settlement register. Martha searched until she located the unusually thick volume wrapped separately beneath the maps. Unlike the toll books, this ledger recorded original land agreements signed when Black Ash Crossing first formed. Every farm boundary, every water right, every public easement, every charitable trust, every donation made for schools, churches, and roads had been copied meticulously into its pages. As Martha continued reading, one particular section forced her to stop. Decades before, a wealthy widow named Eleanor Harrow had donated nearly 100 acres bordering the river. According to the recorded agreement, the land could never be sold for private profit. Instead, rental income from its fertile fields would permanently fund maintenance of the bridge, the public school, and assistance for widows who lost their livelihoods. Martha frowned. She knew those fields. They remained among the richest farmland in the valley, yet the charitable trust no longer existed, or so everyone believed. She turned several pages farther. Attached to the agreement was an original deed signed by county officials and witnessed before 3 magistrates. There could be no question regarding its legality. Then came another surprise. Several decades later, a notation stated that temporary custodianship of the Harrow Trust had been assigned pending administrative review. The signature authorizing that transfer belonged to Roland Mercer's grandfather. Martha's pulse quickened. She searched later entries. There were none. No termination, no lawful transfer of ownership, no record dissolving the trust. It simply vanished from public history after the original records disappeared. She leaned back against the ancient stone parapet, scarcely believing what lay before her. If these documents remained legally valid, and every indication suggested they did, then the farmland currently enriching a handful of influential families might never have belonged to them at all. Its income should have supported public works for decades. Schools should have received repairs. The bridge should never have fallen into neglect. Widows should never have been abandoned. Somewhere along the way, someone had quietly allowed the trust to disappear from memory. Whether through greed or convenience hardly mattered now. The result had been the same. An entire community had been deprived of its own inheritance. Martha closed the ledger carefully. She understood at once that this discovery carried enormous consequences. It could restore forgotten obligations. It could expose generations of negligence. It could also place her directly in conflict with people far wealthier and more powerful than herself. She packed every document back into the chest, exactly as she had found it, before carrying the smaller portfolio home beneath her coat. The ledgers themselves remained hidden inside the bridge for the moment. Few people visited the abandoned crossing anymore, and she trusted the ancient niche more than any place she currently possessed. That afternoon, she visited the county courthouse, hoping only to compare several legal references without attracting attention. Unfortunately, Roland Mercer happened to be leaving his office as she entered. He paused when he noticed the old leather portfolio beneath her arm. "Miss Ellery," he said pleasantly enough. "Still collecting forgotten papers?" Martha smiled politely. Old habits are difficult to abandon. Mercer's eyes lingered on the weathered leather case a moment longer than comfort allowed. "Sometimes forgotten things are best left forgotten," he remarked before walking away. Martha watched him disappear down the hallway, an uneasy feeling settling over her. She could not explain why, but for the first time since purchasing the bridge, she no longer believed she was the only person searching for what had vanished so many years ago. Martha did not sleep that night. The leather portfolio rested upon her kitchen table, while the fire burned low inside the small stone fireplace. And every few minutes, she found herself unfolding the Harrow Trust deed again, searching for some overlooked flaw that would explain why such an important document had disappeared from public knowledge. Yet every seal remained intact. Every signature matched those recorded elsewhere in the county archives, and every witness had been properly documented. If the law still respected its own history, then the truth had survived inside the bridge long after those entrusted with it had failed. By sunrise, she had reached a quiet decision. She would not accuse anyone. She would not spread rumors through Black Ash Crossing. Truth deserved patience before judgment. She carefully wrapped the documents once more and walked to the courthouse, requesting an audience with Judge Nathaniel Brooks, a man whose white beard and measured speech had earned respect throughout 3 neighboring counties. Brooks had known Edwin Ellery well. When Martha entered his office carrying the weathered portfolio, he noticed her expression before he noticed the documents. "Miss Ellery," he said gently, "you look like someone carrying more than paper." Martha placed the portfolio upon his desk without speaking. The old judge examined the seals, then slowly unfolded the first deed. As he continued reading, the warmth gradually disappeared from his face. Nearly an hour passed in silence while he compared signatures, searched reference volumes from his shelves, and inspected every page beneath the morning light. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and removed his spectacles. "These are genuine," he whispered. "Entirely genuine." Martha nodded quietly. "I found them where no one thought to look." Brooks stared out the window toward the distant river. Then, Black Ash Crossing has lived under a misunderstanding for more than 40 years. Within days, the judge ordered a formal legal review. Surveyors were summoned. Archived court records were reopened. Elderly witnesses whose parents had once spoken of Eleanor Harrow's generosity came forward with stories long dismissed as fading memories. Little by little, the forgotten truth emerged. The Harrow Trust had never been dissolved. It had simply disappeared when the supporting records vanished. During the confusion that followed, temporary custodians gradually treated the trust land as though it belonged to them outright. Leases were signed. Profits were collected. Responsibilities quietly ignored. The bridge deteriorated. The school roof leaked every spring. Widows who should have received assistance instead struggled alone. No single act had stolen the valley's inheritance. Rather, decades of convenience had buried it beneath silence. Commissioner Roland Mercer fought fiercely against reopening the matter. He insisted the documents were unreliable, that too much time had passed, that disturbing old arrangements would create unnecessary division. Yet every objection weakened beneath the undeniable evidence preserved inside the hidden stone niche. When Judge Brooks publicly presented the original ledgers before the county council, several elderly citizens wept openly. They recognized family signatures written by fathers and grandfathers long gone. Farmers discovered forgotten boundary agreements protecting neighbors from disputes. Shopkeepers found records proving debts their ancestors had honestly repaid, despite later rumors suggesting otherwise. More than treasure, the bridge had preserved dignity. The investigation continued through much of the winter. Surveyors confirmed the Harrow farmland remained among the valley's most productive acres. Accountants estimated that had the trust operated according to its original purpose, enough revenue would have maintained the bridge, repaired the schoolhouse several times over, and supported dozens of struggling widows throughout the county. Judge Brooks refused to seek revenge against those whose families had unknowingly benefited for generations. Instead, he pursued restoration. New agreements were drafted respecting existing farmers, while directing future lease payments back into the revived Harrow Trust, exactly as Eleanor Harrow had intended, nearly 70 years earlier. The county unanimously approved the arrangement. The first improvements began before spring. Stonemasons repaired damaged sections of the old toll bridge instead of dismantling it. School children returned after the roof was replaced and new desks purchased. A small assistance fund quietly helped elderly women who had spent years choosing between firewood and food each winter. No brass bands celebrated these changes. No newspaper called Martha a heroine. She preferred it that way. She accepted only one request from the council. They asked whether she would become permanent keeper of the restored bridge archive. She smiled softly before answering. Only if the records remain where every generation can protect them. The abandoned toll house beside the bridge reopened after careful repairs. Shelves once emptied by neglect gradually filled again. The recovered ledgers occupied a special cabinet built from sturdy oak with glass doors, allowing visitors to admire the volumes without handling them carelessly. Above the cabinet hung a simple plaque bearing no politician's name. It read only, "Truth kept here outlives those who forget it." School children often visited during afternoons. Martha welcomed every curious question. Rather than speaking only about famous battles or wealthy founders, she showed them ordinary toll entries recording wagons loaded with apples, barrels of flour, blankets, and hopes carried across the river by people history rarely remembered. Communities, she would tell them gently, are built one honest entry at a time. Even Roland Mercer changed, though not in the dramatic fashion some expected. The investigation revealed no crime he himself had committed. Instead, it exposed how easily confidence becomes dangerous when separated from humility. Public trust faded. He lost the next election without bitterness from Martha or celebration from Judge Brooks. Mercer packed his belongings quietly one rainy afternoon and departed Black Ash Crossing, much as Martha herself had once left the records office, carrying only a wooden crate. Karma had arrived without humiliation. He had not been destroyed. He had simply been replaced by someone willing to listen before deciding what no longer mattered. Years passed. Travelers crossing the restored bridge often paused beside the old toll house, curious about the modest archive overlooking the Elkwater River. Some came searching for ancestors. Others sought forgotten property lines or old photographs donated by local families. Many arrived expecting dusty shelves and left carrying a renewed appreciation for the quiet people whose careful work allowed later generations to know who they truly were. Martha remained exactly as those who loved her remembered. She rose before sunrise, unlocked the archive each morning, dusted every shelf, repaired worn bindings, and greeted strangers with patient kindness. She never considered herself extraordinary. In her mind, she had merely finished a task her father began decades earlier, when he wrote 3 simple words beside an unfinished catalog: transferred for protection. At last, she understood he had never abandoned hope that someone worthy would continue searching. One spring evening, many years after purchasing the bridge for $5, Martha stood once again upon the western parapet overlooking the river. Children laughed nearby as fishermen prepared their lines beneath the arches. The bridge no longer felt abandoned. It breathed with life once more. She rested one hand upon the same weathered stone that had concealed the hidden niche through generations of silence. It struck her then that people often imagine great discoveries waiting inside distant mountains or forgotten castles. Yet sometimes the greatest treasures rest inside the ordinary places everyone crosses without a second glance. Sometimes they wait patiently behind one loose stone until an honest heart cares enough to notice. We began by telling you about a woman who was 34 years old, dismissed from the only work she had ever loved, carrying just $7.43 before making what everyone believed was the most foolish purchase imaginable. They saw only an abandoned bridge worth less than its stones. Martha Ellery saw responsibility where others saw inconvenience. Because she valued memory more than profit, an entire valley recovered not merely forgotten documents but forgotten promises. The bridge still stands because one woman refused to measure worth the way the world did. Its stones continue carrying travelers just as faithfully as before, but now they also carry the quiet reminder that truth may sleep for many years without ever truly disappearing. Thank you for spending this journey with us through the quiet roads and enduring hearts of the American frontier. If Martha's story reminded you that even the most overlooked places can hold extraordinary value, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, what is one time you discovered something meaningful that everyone else had overlooked? And if stories of resilience, forgotten history, and quiet courage are the kind you enjoy, be sure to subscribe to Berry Tales and join us for more unforgettable journeys. Until next time, stay close, stay kind, and never underestimate the hidden worth of what the world has forgotten.